these things that don't matter still play too much of a role in how we see one another. And it's sad because the thing that least defines us as people is the color of our skin.
And as a society, we decided that we have to change. We must. We must change.
Live from the campus of Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia, I'm Mark Lamont Hill. Tonight, millennials discuss race, culture, and what it takes to be a change maker in America. Right after this.
Funding for Changemakers, a national millennial town hall on race, culture, and change, is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and is a production of 91.1 FM, WNSB, a broadcast service of Norfolk State University.
Curve it, y'all won't catch me like Adam or Eve. God is humble, the devil is fashionably. It resists the fact he's not what he's asking to be. I love my melanin, I love my color. Tried your best to bring me down, but I'm an overcomer. I love my melanin.
A study by the Pew Research Center shows people born between 1981 and 1996 are the most racially diverse adult generation in American history. That made us wonder, how are millennials making change in society? We decided to invite Norfolk State University's College of Liberal Arts Dean, Newbie Alexander, who will be giving us a historical context for everything we're talking about today. Good evening, Dr. Newbie.
Good evening.
Talk to me about the shift among young people when it comes to discussing race in America. How has it shifted over time, if at all?
The difference that we have today is that people are not growing up in segregated worlds. Instead, they have at least the perception that their worlds are without boundaries. And because of that, they're growing up without all of the issues that my generation, the baby boomers and those before, had to deal with, which is the difference between what you're told and what you see face to face. So many of the students today don't have that particular obstacle in their way.
So the lack of having that obstacle, does it make them misrecognize the existence of racism, or do they see it just differently?
I think they see both. I think it is not understanding when they see racism, and I think it is also not thinking about racism unless they have a personal experience with racism. And then they really don't know how to address that issue. They don't know how to handle that situation, and sometimes that situation ends up costing them their lives.
Wow. You say unless they encounter racism. Is there ever a moment where they don't recognize it? Or rather, are there people who don't recognize or bump into racism at some point in their lives? Is it possible to navigate this modern social world and either not experience racism or totally not recognize it?
I think it is very possible to completely not recognize racism. There are very few African Americans who can walk into any store and not experience some degree of racism, whether it is having a person follow you around the store, having people see you almost as an invisible customer, or simply not feeling welcomed in that place. I've gone into many stores, restaurants throughout this country, and the moment I walk in the door, everybody in that place turns around.
Wow. And for you as a baby boomer, you're able to say, I know what that is.
Yes.
These younger folk, what are some ways that they may make sense of racism outside of seeing it for what it is?
I think that they either think it is just them as a young person coming in, or they just don't know what the situation is. Yeah. They don't have the tools. You know, those of us brought up during segregation, I was in the 6th grade when they began the trial busing here in Norfolk.
Yeah.
And so I know, I was trained to know and believe that I would have to work twice as hard to get half the credit in American society, simply because of the existence of racism. And then I saw that immediately happen to me.
What do we get wrong? What's the biggest misconception there is about racism?
African American parents need to teach their children consistently about history and especially about America's history when it comes to the presence of African Americans and racism in America. Racism and being a bigot are two entirely different things, and most people don't understand that. Racism is a part of our culture. It is a part of the assumed ideas that we have in our culture, and you can be a racist without being a bigot. You may not have a personal negative feeling about me, but you may think negatively about all African Americans because that is the belief in the culture in America.
Dr. Newby, thank you so much for joining us. This has been incredibly insightful.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
Funding for Changemakers, a national millennial town hall on race, culture, and change, is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and is a production of 91.1 FM, WNSB, a broadcast service of Norfolk State University.
Welcome to a National Town Hall meeting on race, culture, and much more. I'm here in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm your host, Mark Lamont Hill, and we've gathered a group of millennials to pick their brains on becoming a change maker in this society. I'm joined tonight by facilitator and black feminist Chelsea Higgs Wise, organizer and activist Shanice Williams, founder of the nonprofit Second Chance Operative Program, Andrew Frazier. I'm also joined by Cameron Bell, who's a community organizer and historian, and Kevin Tremper, pastor and barely a millennial.
Barely a millennial, but I'm going to take it.
Welcome to all of you. On this day 10 years ago, the United States elected its first black president, Barack Obama. You've probably heard of him. He presented a campaign, Change We Can Believe In. Now, 10 years later, in the midst of everything we're wrestling with and thinking about, what does change look like? Have we achieved change yet? Who wants to jump in? I'm going to start with Chelsea.
What does change look like? Has anything changed? Well, I like to really start to see what I feel, like, and describe, do I feel like change has come? I am from Richmond, Virginia. We are the former capital of the Confederacy. So I can walk down the street every day and it lets me know that we still need more change. But I can absolutely say that there has been some change. I think that keeps us hopeful. I think we need to talk that way. But I don't ever want to start that off by getting people too excited because there's so much more that still needs to come.
Well, if anything, this last few years has taught us is that there are certainly distances to go to get where we want to be. Shanice, when you think about change,
well, I was actually a freshman here at Norfolk State on campus the day that Barack Obama got elected. And the one thing I have seen change since Barack Obama has was president was Michelle. You're seeing a lot more black women in politics because of Michelle Obama. She was someone who looked like me, who was actually in the White House. And that, over the course of these last 10 years, I've seen more black women hopping into politics than I have in my lifetime. So that's one big change I can definitely say has come from the Obama administration.
Cameron, help me get some context here historically, just a little bit. Because if we look from November 4th, 2008 until now, when Barack Obama is elected until now, we have some sense of change, but we can't disconnect that from, say, Governor Wilder, you know, in 88, going into 89.
Right.
We can't disconnect that from Jesse Jackson's campaign. We can't disconnect that from the 60s.
Right.
How far have we come?
My history training always makes me very hesitant because it's a long arc, right? And so I think we have to think about what do we mean by change when we say how much has changed, because there are ways in which representative politics are important and just the politics of being able to see someone look like us in that space. But what does it mean to occupy that seat of power still and still have to negotiate, right? This country is a racist country founded on white supremacy. And no matter who holds that office, there are ways in which they have to navigate that space that still upholds certain forms of power and oppression that to me don't always feel like change.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, my non-historian self is hearing, even when black folk get in power, It doesn't necessarily change the structure of power.
That's right.
That's a little chilling, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
Can I say something?
Yeah, jump on on that, please.
I think a false narrative or a false impression is given as a millennial and a middle-class white guy. I thought, wow, look at how much has changed. An African American is in the presidential office. We have come so far. And I think that there's truth in that, but I would also say this. I think in the past 10 years, I think where we are today from when President Obama was elected, I think there has been change that's taken place, but I think a lot more has been revealed.
Like what?
Well, I think you have systematic oppression in our country for hundreds of years, and the thought that you're going to kind of wipe that out, or you're going to get rid of that, or you're going to deal with that with one person and one election is a false assumption to make. Now, it's a great step forward. I'm not taking that away from it, but I also think, from my perspective, I thought there's no more problem.
Right.
Right? Because look, an African American is in the highest office in the land. But really what that did is it revealed the undercurrent of the systematic structure of our country, of how it was founded in, one, racism and majority power. And what that did is it created, I actually think, a false construct that the change that we hope for, the change that we think was going to happen, it was false. It was kind of a veneer to say, look what happened. We've come so far, and we have come. But I also think the roots are really deep.
We're seeing those roots very often right now. Andrew, as a student now, you are able to kind of take in this moment. Many of your peers, many of your friends are voting for the first time or have voted for the first time in the last 2 years. What are you feeling right now? Do you feel like we're in a country that has changed?
I feel like we still have a while to go until we see that progressive change. And I think it starts with us, millennials. Like, our vote matters. I have friends that don't think their votes matters, and there needs to be a change there. So, me personally, I feel that...
Let me push you on that. What kind of change is needed?
Well, personally, I don't think that, what I would want to see is I can drive in Richmond at 3 o'clock in the morning and not get pulled over. And I have the same rights as a white person would. I've seen some things where in Williamsburg, when I was living in Williamsburg, a lot of opportunities to go to a different color skinned person, a white person.
We can say white. It's okay.
We on air. But we,
That's why we need to say it.
Right? And a lot of these opportunities are wasted on people of color. And, because they don't think we're smart enough, or they don't think that we have the tools to effectively make change. And we feel like we always have to have help and some stuff and in some sort. But I feel like until we get that fair advantage, which is, in my opinion, we still have a while to go.
Mark, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
And go back to something you asked, what was revealed. Can we just say, what's obvious, what's been revealed is that we've been watching police officers shoot black people and black men and women on camera. So, Will Smith said it's racism and getting worse, it's being filmed. So that's really what's being revealed at this point. So we're being able to see this honest narrative coming into action and into play. So I just really want to say very specifically what's been revealed is it's been revealed our power of social media and as well as just recording.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because for many people, that was the thing that dashed our hopes. There's a narrative, when I was coming up, Rodney King, we watched Rodney King on videotape get beaten, and we said, well, they finally saw it. This isn't new. This has happened to all of us or somebody we know. We're 1 degree of separation from someone who has been involved in police-involved violence. But now it's on tape. We got the evidence, and then they have a trial, and then we don't get justice.
Right.
Then decades go by, and then we see it with Oscar Grant, and we have these other videotapes. We have evidence, whether it's Eric Garner. We could go on down the list of people. We have videotape. We have evidence. We have in Charleston somebody getting shot in the back running away, right? And we still don't get justice. What does that mean in terms of making sense of this racial moment and also making sense of the climate that we're in, where even when it happens on tape, people don't feel confident that they're going to get justice?
It's like almost watching the cattle being taken to the slaughterhouse when you can physically see on video a black person being killed by an officer. And I do want to say that here in Hampton Roads, our Black Lives Matter movement, our local chapter, we're getting it together here, and we recently indicted a police officer in Portsmouth for the shooting of an unarmed African
Shout
American.
out to Stephanie Morales.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that us as millennials, we're not going to let it's not going to keep happening on our watch. We're going to keep protesting, we're going to keep rallying, we're going to keep writing and talking to our government in order to make sure that they know that this injustice is not going to keep happening on our watch. Literally, we're not going to keep going on Instagram and seeing another black man or a black person die at the hands of someone who's supposed to be protecting and serving us. So we're more vocal about it, whereas we're not going to go out and loot our own cities. We're not going to riot how it was after Rodney King, but we're taking more civil, and we're going to the powers that be to make the changes that we want to see in our community and to protect our sons and our brothers and our classmates, our peers. We mean a lot more to each other. We're connected in this community. So,
no, that's an important point. You talk about climate. We've been talking about climate. President Trump, who tweeted an ad about what would happen if the Democrats took over the House, and you see this idea of this lawless, violent, almost evil Latino saying that he's going to kill more people if he gets out. Sort of reminiscent of Willie Horton in 1988 during the Bush-Dukakis race. There's a way that the climate of racism seems to be normalized. We're seeing it in video. Like you all said, it hasn't gone anywhere. Pastor Kevin said this too. But there seems to be something different about a moment where it can get tweeted by the president. What does that mean?
I mean, I think it means that we're seeing more of the roots, right? And that there's no way to hide from it. I think in the past we could kind of like teach history in a way that obscures this nation's sins, right? And we teach it about Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, and they just wanted freedom and economic opportunity, and it was a necessity. We don't teach it as you created slavery to support a bourgeois class in Europe because sugar and coffee and that was not a necessity, and tobacco, right? Mm-hmm. Now we are seeing, like you said, with the tweets and with what we see with police brutality. It's in our face, and there's no other explanation besides there's a fundamental flaw in how the system is set up, or alternatively, right, it's working for who it was intended to work for. Mm. And it was not intended to work for people like us. It was not intended to work for black people. We weren't counted when this country was founded. We were not considered when this country was founded. So what does it mean to grapple with that for real and not just give lip service to it, not just to kind of say, oh yeah, like slavery happened, but let's get past that. Like, no, there's still stuff from that, from the very fabric of what it means to be, quote, American, right? This whole nationalism movement and, America for Americans. And
how do we grapple with that? What does it mean to grapple with that?
Tell the truth first. Tell the truth, shame the devil. You gotta, we can't. I'm thinking about my younger family members and what they learn in school right now. And I'm like, oh, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. You can tell your teacher, I said, it's wrong. I think that's the first step. As my education background, that I think that is our first step, right? We need to teach the history right. Because kids know, and they can deal with the nuance and deal with the complexity. And then learn better and do better. They don't think, it's a both sides argument. We're not doing a both sides argument to whether slavery should have been allowed, right? But I think from there, it's acting on it, right? Whether it's voting in each election, because we know how much that matters. Doing work in your community with people to organize around specific issues. To reach out to those elected officials, to be on the ground, to put pressure on folks, right? Because change doesn't just come arbitrarily and just doesn't happen. We have to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I think once we know better, we do better, and then collectively that can build a much more power that we need to see.
Oh, no, please jump in.
So you asked, how do we grapple with that? So I'm a clinical therapist, and I really talk a lot about taking care of each other during this movement, during the action part of that, but also just making sure that you're understanding that this truth is traumatizing and is going to be triggering our intergenerational trauma that we have from the institution of slavery in the United States. And so it's really important to understand that as you understand this truth and take it in and swallow it every day, that we understand it's built against us, and that's hard. So just like Dr. Newby was saying earlier, our parents, our homes, our villages really had to build us up to be able to manage that every day and be able to walk in the street in that every day. So that's how we have to grapple with it, is just the understanding the truth and doing our own healing within our circles to be able to keep moving forward, to keep that action going.
I'm hearing some complexity on this panel that I appreciate. At the same time, much of the language from the left, and maybe even the right, has been somewhat singular in pointing out what happened. A lot of people are saying it's Trump. Mm-hmm. Pastor Kevin, we had a tragedy in Pittsburgh where a synagogue was shot up by a crazed gunman, a terrorist.
A nationalist.
And he killed, 11 people died, and afterward, President Trump attempted to come to Pittsburgh to talk about this. Some of the local rabbis said, we don't want you here unless you denounce nationalism, white nationalism. Mm-hmm. Not an unreasonable request, to be sure. One you would think you wouldn't have to ask of your president 2 years in, right? Like, we want to know where you stand on white nationalism. But I'd like you to talk to me a little bit about that, like what it means for our president to have to be, to have almost contingencies in order to come to a town after a tragedy. But second, how much of this is Trump? How much of this is about Trump creating this climate and this narrative? There are many people who are saying, look, we didn't have this before, or we wouldn't have this later. How do you make sense of the Trump moment in light of all this conversation and debate?
Yeah, appreciate that. I think when we talk about the roots, I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing the fruit of what has been planted in our country, and it's not good. And I think more than anything, what we've seen where we are as a culture and society more today than we ever have been, at least in my understanding of recent history, is the polarization of people so that we're pitted against one another. Like, one of the fundamental issues I think that's plaguing society is that if you watch Fox News or if you watch MSNBC, you're already in two different camps. And I've already labeled you, I've already judged you, and I've already convicted you on your beliefs because of whatever position or corner that you're coming out of.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the problem is that we've been given permission to live in the corners.
Yeah.
We've been given permission to say, I'm going to hang out with people who look like me, think like me, dress like me, go to church, whatever it is, and that's my bubble that I'm going to live in, which people have that perspective, and I think it's important to say everybody has a perspective. Everybody has a perspective that has value to it, but this is what I would...
Does everybody?
I think so. I think that's part of human dignity, is to be able to say you have perspective. Part of the human worth of a person is their experience. Now, you may not agree with it, you may not like it, you may not condone it, but it is their perspective.
Okay.
And I think that goes back to valuing the image that everybody is made in, which I would say is the image of God. But with that, the problem is this, nobody has the full perspective or the full position, so everyone's perspective is limited. So the problem is this: if I stay in my camp with people who look like me, think like me, dress like me, whatever, then all I'm doing is feeding the same things that are going to get more of me. And part of what makes this country so beautiful, part of the foundation of this country and all of its flaws, even with slavery and when African Americans were considered 3/5 of a person, what kind of craziness is that? What kind of craziness? Even in all the injustice of the past, part of it, I believe, is to be able to say that people have different perspectives. And part of what we need to do is we need to actually come out of our corners. We need to come out of the polarization of it, the sound bites that come out on media. And actually, what does it mean to have a conversation with someone who's different than you?
Yeah. And let me push you all on this Trump piece too, though. Right? Andrew, let me start with you. How much of this is Trump?
I think it was already there, even before him. It's just now they have a voice that they can use and a figurehead that they can, oh, that's our guy. That's our guy. We're going to continue marketing what was already there. Like when it was here when Bush was here. And, you know, when Obama was here, it was always those people that wanted to undermine all this progress and change that we have going. It's just now they have a voice for that bigotry, that hatred, and, you know, what they already feel. And now they just, there you go.
And what's at stake, Shanice, when we have a figurehead? When you have somebody you can point to and say, that's our guy. But this isn't our guy. White nationalists have always had a guy.
Mm-hmm. They've always had a guy.
But he ain't always been the president.
Exactly. He hasn't always been in the highest seat in the land, in the nation. And what I want to piggyback a little bit, just kind of go back a little bit to what's kind of starting this and what's trying to change it in the climate. Black people are taught to fear white people for our lives. We're taught that we need to be courteous, be silent, remain calm when you are dealing with a white police officer. We're taught to fear white people. White people are taught to fear black people. We're dangerous. We're thugs. So you got two different races both living in corners of fear instead of coming to each other with love and understanding to figure out, why are you afraid of me? What about me makes you scared? So when he say that it was always there, it was always there. You had a group of white men who were afraid that they were seeing more minorities, more brown people, more black faces moving into their suburbs, coming into their white spaces and infiltrating their safe spaces, coming into their corners. Now they have nowhere to go. So now you have the president, Donald Trump, saying, I'm here for you, white man. I'm here to protect you. I'm here to push you forward. I'm here to put you on that pedestal that you once were on. I'm here to make white men great again. And that is what pushed them out into the forefront. It empowered them. So now you have a group of white men, nationalists, who are empowered to make America great again by no longer living in their fear of black people. They aren't using white flight anymore. They're using that they're empowering now. He's their empowering figure. He's the Superman, that S on their chest, that make America great again.
Right.
That hat, that symbol.
Right, and that symbol means a lot. We're going to unpack what that symbol means and a whole bunch of other stuff on the other side. So stay with us, because we have much more to come. Live from Norfolk State University, this is a conversation on race, culture, and change. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Funding for Changemakers, a national millennial town hall on race, culture, and change, is funded in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and is a production of 91.1 FM, WNSB. A broadcast service of Norfolk State University.
Welcome back. I'm Mark Lamont Hill, and tonight we're diving into a conversation about race, culture, and change in America. Of course, I'm speaking with facilitator and feminist Chelsea Higgs-Wise, organizer and activist Shanice Williams, founder of the nonprofit Second Chance Operative Program, Andrew Frazier, and community organizer and historian Cameron Bell, and last and certainly not least, Pastor Kevin Chibrup. Let's talk a little bit about tactics and strategy. I spent a lot of time on the ground in Ferguson, and there were a few things that struck me when I was down there. One was how central secular movements were. Religion was there, for sure, but it was very secular. A lot of civil rights folk, the traditional civil rights leaders, were not at the center of this movement. A little bit different. Some of the chants were a little bit different. Some of the organizing tactics were a little bit different. Things moved differently, and it made me wonder, what does resisting racism look like in 2018, perhaps versus other movements? Cameron, you both have the historical context, and you are a community organizer. So talk to me about what that means.
So the question you said, what does resistance look like now? I think it takes on multiple forms. I think one is just existing, and not to trivialize it or to make it seem like that, that's it. But I think existing in our truths and our full selves, right? Being the full range of a human being. For so long, especially as Black people, we've been pigeonholed, right? We have the stereotypes of the Jezebel for Black women, or the mammy figure, whatever it is. Like we aren't allowed to have that full range of human emotion, and we see it on media, we see it in books, we see it wherever when it's white curators making content about us. But I think just for Black folks to just live, even that is resistance. And then beyond that, right? Like it's whatever strategy you employ, whether it's political and voting and being involved that way, whether it's doing things on the ground in your community locally, right? That's okay. Well, now we're going to do a soup kitchen because they're not feeding our community like that. That's not coming down to this part of town. So we're about to make our own, right? Like, okay, the kids need school supplies. We're about to just make this happen. And then from there, moving on to, okay, well, who's in power to change this, right? Okay, cool. Let's try to change that. If they don't want to change it, let's change who's the person in power. And you get more Black folks running for office or what have you. But there's a confluence of strategies and a confluence of methods. But I think primarily just resisting, just living fully and not living for the white gaze, which I think is hard, right? Because we're taught sometimes you have to be concerned about the white gaze for your life. That's real. But I think in those moments, it's like, I'm just going to be free today. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do because I can and not worry about, oh, I have to be respectful because, you know, they're going to think that all Black people can't speak proper English. I got to speak proper English. I can't say ain't because, you know, that's not how we're supposed to talk. Or I need to wear my hair a certain way because whatever. Wear it however you want to wear it. Wear the weave one day, wear it cut the next day. Living fully and freely, I think, as a first step is huge.
Absolutely. What are some other things? Chelsea, talk to me about what that looks like for you on the ground.
Yeah, so you mentioned the historical context of a spiritual faith center base historically with organizing in Black communities, and especially from Richmond, Virginia, we actually have a part of our city that's called Churchill because we are flooded with churches, and we have that foundation there. But what it looks like very differently right now is that we have a split, and even in the generational organizing, there is an older population that's still really rooted in that religious context, and then there's a younger population. We have different spaces. We organize in different spaces. We come out in a different type of disruption than something that is more contained. I heard someone say on the panel earlier that we may be a little bit more civil, but in a lot of different ways compared to history, we are not. And that's something on the ground that I'm seeing about strategies is just a different approach. And so that we don't continue this cycle of it repeating. So why don't we try something different? Why don't we do a different type of disturbance with that? So on the ground, it really looks like young people organizing, we have colleges organizing, we have family members, and unfortunately, I'm still seeing us siloed in organizations and issues still, rather than being able to collaborate and collectively organize just as Black people to address the systemic racism in a certain area, space, and place. But yeah, it looks a lot different than history because our spaces are different. We're not in churches. Our language is very different. We're much more disruptive and open with our truths. Yeah. And so, yeah, and I'm really proud of that. I think that's exciting. I think it engages us more. And it also shows that we are not a monolithic people. People don't necessarily see themselves in the religious Christian Protestant faith a lot with Black people. So we're stepping outside of that, which also gives us a much more freedom in a certain context as well.
Pastor Kevin, talk to me about that, because I'm hearing a lot of movement away from the church in terms of it being the centerpiece of everything. Yeah. In your experience, how much of that is accurate? How much of that is overstated? What role is the church playing these days?
That's a great question. I think in some ways the church, so being part of the white evangelical church, we regret in our history of not being present at times during the civil rights movement, and I think we lost,
or being present on the other side,
right?
Y'all wasn't around. Y'all just
But that's what I mean.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying it wasn't a neutral position. It was actually often the opposite.
Right. That's simple.
Yeah.
Tell the full story.
So I do think that I do think that part of it is millennials are frustrated with institution as a whole, as a organization, and so I think what you have seen is this incredible movement, and it's this kind of a swing of the pendulum from the organized, which would be who are your church leaders, your community leaders, who are the ones who traditionally, historically, have been rally points, and it's moved to this organic side. So it says, and here's the beauty. It has a double-edged sword. Is that anybody can have a voice, because if you have a phone, you can communicate something. Absolutely. And so all of a sudden you just see you don't need the pastor, the clergy person, or the rabbi, whoever, whatever faith denomination you're from or religion. You don't need that person, because you can kind of centralize and rally people around yourself or around the cause that you're a part of. And so I think you see a distrust of the organization or the organized, and you see this kind of freedom and movement that has kind of empowered this organic expression. And so, I mean, even when you talk about, go to Ferguson, I mean, there's all different kinds of groups in there. There were some groups that were doing this and some groups that were doing this.
Yeah.
And you try to figure out who's leading this, and you would just hear a lot of different voices, but there was no one centralized person, that from my understanding, that was doing it. There was just a lot of people who were able to take initiative and take action very quickly, and people followed that. So I think that one of the major things is you see the shift from the organized to the organic, which is empowering people, and people have a voice today. They can have a voice much easier than they've had in the past.
Andrew, who do you look to for leadership? Who do your friends look to for leadership?
I mean, first I look to God for leadership, but also just look at like other people around me who is in positions where I would like to see myself in.
When you think about political leadership, for example, you know, we didn't have black presidents when I was in middle school, high school, elementary school, college for that matter. But there was Jesse Jackson. Mm-hmm. He was kind of like the president of black people. You know, he might have lost in '88, but he won in the hood, right?
The black community.
Is there anybody, are there people who, when things are happening, you say, I want to know what so-and-so thinks we should do. I want to know what so-and-so thinks about this. Are there places you look for that?
Okay, so my hero in all of black history is Malcolm X. I like how he was able to motivate people and persuade them and give them knowledge about what the issue is. This is how we need to do it. Trust me. And that's how a lot of stuff that I do, the school to prison pipeline is a problem.
Man.
This is.
But is anybody alive who you look to like that now? Okay, Angela Rye. I would ask that the rest of you. Tell me who are we looking to? And it's not a singular person, maybe, and it might not be a political figure. I mean, a lot of people I see listen to T.I. Yeah. A lot of people follow, of course, Angela Rye. I heard Angela Rye's name.
Aunt Maxine.
Maxine Waters.
You?
You? Yourself? Don't do that. That'll get you all kinds of messed up. So you. It seems like you all aren't necessarily looking for religious figures or even necessarily elected officials anymore.
No. So religion-wise, so I'm saying black people as a community are moving away from religion and moving more towards spirituality. When it comes to us going out into the streets and speaking up for ourselves, it's not something that a religious leader told us to do. We're feeling it in our spirit now. We're feeling it in our souls. We're vexed to our spirits. And when that spirit speaks to you, you know that's your call to action. And it wasn't a religious leader who told me you need to start organizing community events. You need to start working with Black Lives Matter. It was me watching a black man die and my soul, feeling that hurt in my soul that said to me, okay, my spirit now, I need to start figuring out, I need to love myself enough to love my sisters and love my brothers and love my community and want to put myself at risk for them. I have to love them enough to do that. So it wasn't a church or a leader who could instill that in me. It was the love of God that instilled that in me, and knowing that I need to love my brothers and my sisters the way I love myself. And loving myself was the first step as a woman and as a black woman.
Black woman. Let's pivot off that word. So much of the conversation about state violence is about black men being killed by police. We know black women are dying at the hands of law enforcement too. They're being arrested more than they should be. They're being sexually assaulted. They're being overcharged. I mean, we look at the case of Sandra Bland, which happened soon after the case of Mike Brown. What role should gender and gender conversation be in a conversation about black freedom? Because I hear a lot of talk about black men. I don't think we're hearing enough about black women, black trans, black queer. Where does that fit into this conversation?
It should fit at the top. If we're talking about intersectionality even within black people, then we need to look at who's at the lowest of the social hierarchy, right? On the social human hierarchy, then we're talking about trans black women. If we're just looking at race and gender, that's who we're talking about. Now, you can add in ability, cognitive, intellectual on that, but if we're just talking about race and gender, then yes, that they need to be uplifted at the top of that, because then if we're talking about what will trickle down, it comes from the grassroots up to grass tops. But yes, That's the entire point of intersectionality, is to uplift that. That's what womanism
Talk about
talks about
intersectionality for those who don't know.
Oh, okay, great. So intersectionality is you're really looking at different parts of your identity and how they intersect to make your overall perspective, your overall personality, how you present in a room. And that can be over many different sectors: race, gender, ability. This could go on religion, education. You can look at that. And so it's really looking more than just at what you present when you walk in a room, what someone looks at you and your race and what that is. It can also be body type. So it really is just understanding that we're all built on a system of oppression, and where you fall and where you intersect in a space and place is really determine your privilege. So when we're talking about privilege, that's what that intersectionality is, and plotting your privilege on an intersectional type of graph almost, and where that belongs, then we need to look at the bottom of that, and that's Black trans women. So whatever we're doing, if we think about Black trans women when we're doing that, and if they will benefit from that, then it will benefit for us all.
So how do we have that conversation in a world that is deeply transphobic, deeply patriarchal, deeply misogynistic? For example, I'm using Mike Brown as the example. Mike Brown dies August 9th, 2014. There's a 3-month window around that time where 13 Black trans women are killed.
Right.
It doesn't make the news. Mike Brown can be the poster child for state violence. Trayvon Martin can be the poster child for state violence. I'm not sure we have a national movement behind Sandra Bland, much less somebody like Amia Hall, Black trans woman. Mm-hmm. Why not? Maybe I'm asking an obvious question, but why not?
People fear what they don't know and what they don't understand. So when you have people who are going to lead a movement for a Black trans woman, their community, our community, the Black community, is automatically going to question their sexuality. And that's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have in our community, is about their sexuality, because a lot of generational trauma comes from admitting who you are to your parents or your elders. In our generation, who you are is a lot more acceptable. But when you're talking to your parents and you're talking to your grandparents, to people who are providing for you, who are supposed to keep you safe and secure, and you're having this conversation with them and you're not accepted, can you imagine trying to have that conversation with the whole world? A lot of people, they don't want to bring it. It's taboo. It still hasn't reached a place yet in our community for us to address it and for us to really protect our Black trans women. Nobody wants to lay their life for something that they can't understand or that they haven't even accepted. So it comes with accepting that a Black trans woman is still a person, that is still a human being. Their life still matters just as much as anybody else's. And if you can just cut out everything else, the Black, the trans, cut out everything else and just look at that person as a human being who deserves to be here, not because you think they deserve to be here, but because God put them on this earth for a reason, and they also have a purpose.
If I can continue on with that, we have to also accept, clap it up. Yeah. We also have to accept that we've been taught wrong. We've been taught to fear Black trans women. We've been taught to say, ooh, we're gross. We've been taught to not want to understand them. And if we're being really honest, let's look at the Black church. Let's look at what a lot of that teaching has said. Let's look at what we've been taught in our household. So yeah, we have to understand that where that comes from is because we have been told in our own households to not understand, not ask any questions, don't even make eye contact
don't look that way
with them in the street. So it's going to take a lot of truth telling and also saying we've been taught wrong. It's not just about human, and I love the idea that we are all humans, but I also really believe in the empowerment of saying that. So saying Black trans women as much as possible and not just keeping it on a human baseline. And that talks about a little bit more with equity and language, but yeah, it's really that say their name, understand it, understand that you've been taught wrong. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to have a gender conversation with women only. That seems problematic. Andrew, what should men be doing? Particularly in these kinds of circles, and by these circles I mean organizing and activist circles, what should we be doing to make sure that there is justice
for women also?
Yeah.
Honestly, we need to start addressing that there is a problem, and that we as men we shouldn't be the only solution to everything. Personally, I feel that it starts with knowing and starting to stop the stigma of, hey, you're gay, I don't want nothing to do with you. It still is like going back to, what was just said in the Black church. I was raised, oh, if you're gay, that's wrong, and it took me until I went in the military and I was like around all these different people, that then I had to,
including gay men.
Exactly, you know, and I had to adapt, and I had to put that stigma behind me, and so I can get the mission done. And that still transpired with me when I got out of the military. Like, I look at a gay man or a transgender woman as as my friend. Like, I don't feel any harsh tone toward them. And I feel like once we as black men or just men in general understands that it's nothing, that's just that we're gonna have that in our life. That's the difference. It's gonna be a difference then.
Absolutely. So Kevin, you are in an interesting position.
A man and the church.
You got the church, you got white, you got hip hop, you got all kinds of connections here to culture. What role does the church play? What role can the church play? What role can you play in helping us reimagine this thing?
Yeah, it's great. My heart is always still troubled when King said, Sunday mornings are the most segregated time in the country.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is where the church, some of the church, because there were great faith leaders who were leading the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
And they were carrying the banner for this march. But I think part of it is to say that there has been part of the church that was complicit in sins of racism, inequality, and injustice. Mm-hmm. And so part of that for me is entering into like repentance of that, to say that was wrong. That's not right. And to acknowledge it, to acknowledge that as a white guy, the playing field is not fair for everyone. For me, the thing that has gripped my heart the most, my wife and I, we have 5 kids. We've adopted 2 of them. One is African American. And when we were going through training, when we were adopting this child, my son Jaden, I was told that from other families, well, when Jaden starts to drive one day, you're going to have to sit down and have a conversation with him.
Right. The conversation. This is getting deep, and I don't want to cut you off too much. No, I want to get to the conversation. We got to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to hear about the conversation that you had to have and that so many other parents have to have around this question of race and danger from the state. Stay with us. We have much more to come live from Norfolk State University. This is a conversation on race, culture, and change in America. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Mark Lamont Hill, and I am here with a live town hall at Norfolk State University. And if you're just joining us, I want you to know that we have had an amazing conversation so far, and we still have a bit more to go. I'm joined by facilitator and feminist Chelsea Higgs-Wise, organizer and activist Shanice Williams. Andrew Frazier is also joining us. He's the founder of Second Chance Operative Program. Pastor Kevin Trimper joins us, and of course, Cameron Bell is a community organizer and historian. Kevin, you were talking to us about adopting children, one of whom is African American, and being told that at some point you're going to have the talk.
Yep. Yeah, so your first question was, what role does the church play? I believe the church in the past has not led the way that the church should, and if anybody should be leading about reconciliation, it is the Church of Jesus Christ. Because that is what Christ has done for us. And so we should be agents of reconciliation in a hurting and broken world. And so my heart and my passion, our church, is dedicated to having these conversations and figuring out how we engage and are part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. To what you were saying, my son, I was shocked when we adopted one of my sons, Jaden, when I was told that I was going to have the conversation that when he goes to drive that if he's pulled over by a police officer that he needs to be told to just simply be complicit. That he needs to do whatever the officer says, and that he just needs to do whatever he needs to do to get home, basically alive. And then I said, well, what about my son, other kid? They're both 10 years old, and they said, well, you don't need to have that conversation for him. He's gonna be okay, but Jaden won't be. Wow. I just thought, what kind of crazy world do we live in, America, that I have to have this one conversation with my black son, but I don't have to have it with my white son. And what it showed me is that I love both my sons equally, the same, but what it also told me is I need to love them differently. Mm-hmm. I need to love them differently for who they are, what their needs are. And so when we step out of that, my conversation with my family, and I go to my church family, as we're trying to live into a reconciled paradigm, we want to be a church that reflects our city. What that means is I love the people who come to my church the same, but it also means this. For those who are minority and African American, it means that I need to love them differently as well. Wow. It means that I need to have different conversations. I need to have different moments. I need to pastor in a different way because their needs are different than others in my congregation, simply because of their race. Yeah. Now, that's not the way it should be, but it's the way that it is. Right. And part of me being effective needs to acknowledge that and then to lean into that.
Let's talk about needs. Cameron, what do we need? I want you to solve the world's problems in 4 minutes we got left.
4 minutes. Can I actually be more specific? What do we need?
To move forward, what do you think is the thing that, whether it's an investment, whether it's a resource, whether it's a leader, whether it's an idea, what are some of the, and obviously you can't name all of them, but what's one thing you think that would help us make sense of this moment and advance?
I think a commitment to truth-telling. I think I've reiterated that multiple times, but I also think a commitment to trying to reimagine new possibilities for our world, right? I think part of the resistance conversation earlier about leaders and who do we look to, and we heard about different forms of leadership out of Ferguson and different organizing modes, right? And not necessarily looking to the church or to current institutions. I think that's all part of our generation thinking of new ways to be, new ways to exist, new ways to even exercise power, right? Whether it's group-centered power, horizontal leadership structure, whatever that looks like. So I think the commitment to truth-telling always, just unapologetically always, and then a commitment to constantly trying to relearn and reimagine what we can and should do and should be. And just asking the questions, right? Like, we shouldn't take anything for granted. The things that we assume that we were taught, whether it was from church and upbringings, I have a similar background, right? Like questioning that. Like, why are they teaching me that these people don't matter? Right. Who benefits from this? What power benefits from this? And how can I undo that so no one else has caused harm? I think those are our fundamental things that we need to get to.
Yeah, that analysis piece of it. Yeah, in addition to what you said. Yeah. Andrew, how important is it to you to see people get out there and vote?
It's 110% important to me. Constantly going over and reiterating that with everybody from my school to my church, to my community. We need to go out there and vote. That's the only way we're going to see that change that we are coming here together talking about. And there's no place right now for my vote doesn't matter, I'm not going to vote. There's no place and time for that right now. We all need to come together and go to the polling station, and we need to come together as a community, as one, and vote. Like, that's 100%.
Well, we all know that voting won't solve everything. Voting is a tactic. It's not an overarching philosophy, but we also know that voting does matter and that there are a whole bunch of people trying to stop us from voting. And if that's not evidence that it matters, nothing is. So we have to get out and vote, fight, organize, and continue to have conversations like this one. So I'm grateful to you all for joining me today. I'm grateful for you all having a conversation with me. Again, I've been joined by Chelsea Higgs-Wise. She's a facilitator and black feminist. Shanice Williams, organizer and activist. Andrew Frazier is founder of the nonprofit Secretary's Operative Program. Cameron Bell is a community organizer and historian. And for just a few more moments, Kevin Trimper is a millennial. Give them all a round of applause. I'm Mark Lamont Hill.
Funding for Changemakers provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The executive producer for Changemakers is Edith Thorpe. Co-executive producer Reggie Hicks. Kelly Jackson and LaRaven Taylor producers. Engineering support provided by Keith Woody Kinney. Special thanks to Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. NSU faculty and staff. WNSB professional staff and interns, Mr. and Mrs. Will and Susan Tompkins, Wendy Williams, Morris Baxter, and Rose Holmes. Special thanks to Glenn Simmons, Jamal Ahmed, and Ambassador Andrew Young. Music for Changemakers provided by Fly and the Dangerfield Newbies. Changemakers, a millennial town hall on race, culture, and change, is a presentation of WNSB-FM, a broadcast service of Norfolk State University.